Well, have you ever listened to the geese? Well, they make such magnificent noises as they fly along. Scientists believe that geese honk from behind to encourage those up in front. Well, today I want to hear a lot of honking from behind, honking over this quilt pattern, Migrating Geese. Now first I want to show you how to make the blocks for your Bears in the Woods quilt, and then we'll use the same number of geese for this pattern. So let's get in formation and start on our Flying Geese blocks. These colorful plaids make this quilt perfect for hanging in the fall. Well, did you know that when a goose falls out of formation from illness or injury, two other geese join him and they stay with him and protect him till he's healthy and ready to fly again? Well, if we had the sense of a goose, we'd just stick together and get this quilt done. Well, you need to have 8 different blues. You need to have 1/4 yard cuts of each one of them, and from each piece you cut out 1 7.5 inch strip, and from those 7.5 inch strips cut 4 7.5 inch squares from each. Oh, well, that's easy to do. Now let's go on to the background. Now you need to cut 9-inch strips, and I have my fabric all lined up on the grid, and all I want to do is just trim off this torn, bruised edge. Well, I'm going to use the ruler cutter combination. Just go ahead, line that up on the grid because I don't want to actually leave that in the quilt. This is where it was cut from the bolt. So you just bear down, just trim off that torn edge, just get rid of that, and then you cut it into 9-inch strips. Let me just move this over to 0 right here. Ooh, that's good. Now, right here, drop it at 9 inches. Look at it up at the top and on the bottom. Now, this is actually a great tool, just in case you don't have the coordination for using the ruler and the rotary cutter together. Let me move this over, and then I'll cut one more time at 18. Now, for each strip, for each 1/4 yard that you cut, you need to have 1 9-inch strip. And then the 9-inch strips are cut into 9-inch squares. Well, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So I'm just going to take these, turn them, and stack them up. And then right over here in this left edge, oh my gosh, now I have 4 layers. Is that right? Can I go through 4 layers? Well, just have to have my Wheaties for breakfast. Okay, so trim off that salvage edge right here, and then move this over in 0 and cut it into 9-inch squares. And we are just going to be ready for sewing in 1 second. Okay, now you just keep on cutting so you have enough 9-inch squares, and then you take this piece and put it so that it's right side up. And from each one of these, I'm just going to go ahead and grab the blues over here. You do some stacking. Just take the blue and put it right sides together to it. And you need to center it. Now, this looks really strange because these are not the same size. But you just center it as best as you can. Check along all of the edges. And once you have that centered, then just go ahead and take your ruler and take a marker, something that you can see. Line that up from corner to corner. We're just going to draw diagonal lines. Now I'm using this permanent marker so you can see it better, but just a pencil, whatever, will work fine. Okay, so you've got that diagonal line drawn right through the middle. If you feel better with pins, go ahead and put them in. Why not? That'll work great. But keep your pins away from that line so you don't get hung up on them. Okay, 1/4 inch seam. Same thing, not much different here, except that you'd have a whole big stack of them already marked and ready to go. Now just drop your presser foot so that it's lined up with that left edge of the line. 1/4 inch seam, step on the gas, hold this nice and flat, and you just go down one side of it. You can go ahead and butt on the next right behind it if you like, but I'm just going to show you on one because I can show you that whole technique. Then at the end, just turn it around, drop the presser foot on the second side, and just step on the gas and get right down to that end. You repeat this with each color 4 times. Now, once you've gone both sides, pull out those pins, and then just go ahead, drop your cutter and your ruler right on that line, right down through the two of them. Let's see if I can get that lined up perfectly. Great. And just cut it. So you've cut it into two separate pieces, and these look really strange, don't they? Okay, now we need to do some pressing, and usually the rule is to press it towards the dark, but this time my rule is going to be press it towards the largest square. I think I'll just turn it around this way. I'm going to set that seam, lift that light piece up, or the largest piece up, and then carefully go in and press that seam so that it's right behind the largest square. A little bit different than what we normally do here, but whenever we're done with this, the seams are going to just lay so nice and flat and really have great geese. All right. Now we've got to try to line up these edges. That's going to be pretty incredible. They're not the same size at all. Okay, so let's take one of these and take the second piece and put it right sides together to it, but make sure dark is touching light, then it's the opposite on the other side. Now you can't line up these seams in the middle, heaven's sakes, you can't be that far off, but at least you can line up these outside edges. So get those in perfect order, line them up as best as you can, and then it's the exact same technique. We're just going to go ahead, take the ruler, draw a diagonal line corner to corner, use a marker, whatever you'd like, and just zip right down along there. You know, there are a number of different ways to do flying geese, but this particular method actually wastes very little fabric. Oh, you want to have lots of fabric left over so you can go on and do other things. Little waste in this one. They're very accurate as well. Okay, line up your 1/4 inch on one side of the diagonal line again. Go over that seam. You're actually not fighting that at all. And then just turn it and then go down the opposite side exactly like we did. Now actually you can get just a whole flock of these geese done. Oh, it doesn't take you long, couple of hours, and you make the same number of geese for the Migrating Geese quilt as well as the outside border for the Bears in the Woods quilt. Works exactly the same. Okay, got our sewing done. And we are pretty much just into squaring up. Okay, let me drop the cutter right on that diagonal line. Cut right through there. Separate that into two pieces. And then when you open it up and look, it just doesn't look like geese yet. But I am going to do some pressing. And so the seams go in the right direction right here in between these two seams. One going this way, one going this. Right in the middle, I just want to take a nip right down to those stitches. Right here again, right in the center, so I can get the seams going perfect. Now, have one more pressing to do. It's just going to lay that on the wrong side up, and you can go right into the V or right into the geese on this one. Turn it around, go right into the geese on this one. You want to make sure from the right side that there are no puckers in this geese. That's looking good. Just turn over the other one now and flatten it. Do you know, out of those two squares, we are going to get 4 geese. It's going to be great. Okay, I'm going to go back and do some sewing, and then I'll show you how to just take these pieces and square them up so they look like geese. Using the right rulers are important in squaring up the geese, and I like to use several different rulers. Now the first one is the 6x12, and when you check it, make sure that it has a 1/4 inch line right along one edge, as well as 45-degree lines. Now this one has several on it, so that when you place it on a squared up geese, this is actually a finished one, that 1/4 inch line runs right along here where the seam allowance is, and the 45-degree line goes right down the seam. Well, let me just take one of these pieces. Now this is enough for squaring up 2 of the geese. So just place the 45-degree line right down the seam and put that 1/4-inch line right here, so that right at the peak of the geese. And you just go ahead, hold your ruler firm and cut it. Now if you have a turnable, you can just go ahead and turn that around without picking up your pieces. Drop that 1/4-inch line right at the peak again and line up the diagonal line on the seam. Ooh, that's great. So that when you cut it out, you actually have this piece right in the center. This is your safety right here. You can just take that and get rid of it. Now, the second ruler that I like to use is the 12.5-inch square up ruler. And you should look and make sure that the ruler has a 45-degree line on it. The second line you should check for is a good 3.5-inch line right here. The third measurement is a 6.5, because that's the whole total size. The 3.5 by 6.5 is the measurement that we need to get. Okay, so take the 12.5-inch square up ruler and line it up so that the diagonal line runs right down through that seam, and right on this edge place it so that the 3.5 is right here, and up on the opposite end you should have the 6.5. That'll come right out to the peak. Over here, 3.5 inches. So just hold your ruler firm, cut up and over, and you've actually trimmed 2 sides. And then the best way is just to leave the ruler in position, but pick up the piece and turn it so that this time you can go ahead and drop the 3.5-inch right here on this edge, and then an exact 6.5 here. And if you've been accurate, all you have to do is just trim off that little piece right on the edge, and then you're just going to have a perfect geese. Now check and make sure that you've got the seam allowance right here, and the seams go right into the corners. That's looking good. And I have one more technique that I want to show you. I actually just designed this ruler, and it works great. Now this is a 3.5-inch by 6.5-inch ruler, and I just did some lines on it. Right here is the 1/4-inch line along here. The peak is right at 3 1/4 inches, exactly half of that. And so you can just go ahead and place this ruler right on your geese. Let's see, just line that right up in there. All right, hold that down firm and just cut up one side, across the other way. Don't pick it up and move it, but just turn your table right around, holding it in place, and just trim on the 2 remaining sides. And actually that way you're going to have perfect geese. Well, let me show you how to sew pairs of these geese together. Now, when you're ready to sew, you always want to take them and place them so that this piece on the right is pointing into this piece on the left. Because when you take this piece and you flip it right sides together, now you can see you've got that seam right there, and you want your stitches to cross right at this point. Couldn't be better. Okay, so let me just get this lined up. Oh, actually it looks like I have 2 stacked up here. That would be some real fast sewing, wouldn't it? Okay, line up the outside edges right here and use the perfect 1/4-inch seam and match it on the opposite side, and use your stiletto just to hold that flat. And then you make your stitches, whoops, just a little twist right there. Make your stitches cross 1/4 inch right through that point. Let's just do it, check and see. Hey, looks good on this side, right through there. And then when you open it up, then you've got a nice crisp point right up here at the tip. So all you want to do is just sew these pairs together. I'm going to take these stacks, sew them together, and then I'll show you how to do the Migrating Geese quilt. The Flying Geese quilt is very masculine looking. It's very appealing to men and boys. And if you'd make it out of flannel, oh, it would be even cozier this winter. Now, when you sew your blocks together, sew them in rows of 13 and 11. You need to have 4 rows of 13 right for the center of the quilt. And then at the top and the bottom, there are 2 rows that have 11 geese each. And then finish off in the corners with just pairs of geese. Now, to do this quilt, you need to have a total of 104 Geese. Oh, it's great. Now this fits a twin-size bed. It's extra long, just perfect for the young men in your family. Now take those 13 geese. Once you have those sewn together, line them up with lattice that is 3.5 inches wide. And then as you sew the lattice in between these rows, make sure you line up these seams across from each other. We want those geese flying nice and straight. Once the whole center section is together with the lattice in between, then take the geese that are 11 sewn together, place it on top and measure it, because if this 11 geese doesn't fit on top, oh, you are going to have problems. Now you might be able to make an adjustment in your seam allowance or make an adjustment in the width of your lattice, just so you can get those 11 strips on the top, the 11 geese in a strip. Now in the top part, you only use a lattice that is 2.5 inches wide, just so it all fits together, a 2.5 here and a 2.5 here. And then on the sides of the geese, add 4.5 inch strips, sides only. And then all around the outside edge of the quilt, all you need is one smashing 6.5 inch border, and make sure you put those pairs right in the ends of your borders. Oh, we are just flying right along here. I can just imagine what the family is doing inside the cabin under the pines. Well, I think they're inside making Christmas pudding. Well, it took 5 weeks to make, and they just stirred in meat and eggs, some porridge and raisins, and any other kind of fruit they could find. Then they'd stick a button right in the pudding. Well, the button was called the bachelor's button, and whoever found it on Christmas Day was to remain unmarried. Well, over in the side yard, I think the young boy was just chasing after his pet goose, and he had to take it into his mother for Christmas dinner. Well, that's a sad story, isn't it? Well, this is a cabin in the daytime sky. Now, I have another cabin laid out in the midnight sky. Oh, entirely different. Now, all of these blocks are made out of flying geese. There are 3 different kinds of pine trees in this wall hanging. Now, the first one is just 4 flying geese patches sewn together. This is a great tall pine tree, and then right underneath it is that tall trunk. The second pine tree is made out of 3 flying geese patches, shorter trunk on the bottom, so you get that different level of the forest. And then the third pine tree is right here, 3 flying geese patches with a dark piece of sky on the top. Well, it's actually made of 2 rows, and the width of each of the rows is 12.5 inches, and there are spacers in between to help set them apart. The trunks are the spacers right here, and then there's night sky that are spacing the geese apart right here. Now the star is also made out of the flying geese patch, and it finishes up at 12.5 inches. And so the whole wall hanging fits together. The house is also 12.5 inches. Now you can just turn this into a great Christmas wall hanging just with some embellishing. Now if you find a piece of fabric like this one, you can actually just go ahead, put some fusible interfacing on the back and just cut out a family. Look, we have a father who's been out, probably caught a moose, and he has a little raccoon, and the mother has a pet bear. Well, they look great. How about some snowman? We could just build some snowman right outside the cabin, let them decorate it. And I know the children would just love to have Santa flying through that night sky. Oh, they're all wonderful embellishments. Well, my holidays are well on their way, but I still need to sew together my antique quilt blocks. Geese patches became popular in the mid-1800s. They could be made with small pieces out of the many fabric choices available. Well, the original quilt maker made 2 distinct sets of geese, one with dark geese and white shirting, and then a second set with mixed mediums and darks. So I decided to make 2 different quilts. Now the first layout I selected is called Wild Goose Chase. I featured my favorite patches, the indigo blues and reds with shirting, and then set them together with the squares I cut from the apron And this is all that's left. Oh, it's just great. Well, the whole center of the quilt has a lightness and unity about it. I'm making a second quilt from all of the colorful geese, and I'll set it together with the Roman coins fabric as lattice. Well, I just love the colors that Marie Webster referred to with disdain as oil red, oil green, and violet yellow. And these black prints were referred to as mourning prints. Now the patches are on the bias, and this part is on the straight of the grain. Well, what a challenge to put together. I had to just ease in that bias and use a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Well, there aren't too many crisp peaks in this quilt. I think the original quilt maker is just chuckling from her grave and saying, "Oh, Eleanor, why do you think I didn't finish that quilt?" Well, may you enjoy sewing your geese flocks, and the next time I'll be showing you how to put the Bears in the Woods quilt together. Well, we're getting closer to our homespun holidays and that Christmas goose.